Now recording. So, welcome back. Hope everyone had a good break. Come on in. Here comes everyone. You guys were detained by the previous class? Just got it? All right. Good. I'm glad I'm not teaching to a class of 2 people. That's nice. Given that we are now well into the course, it is probably useful to go over the plan. Wow, whenever this was put together, the winter break was really late in the semester. So it moves around a lot. So right now we are on week 6, Ajax. Let us take a quick look at the syllabus. There we go. The midterm is to be held, according to this, Wednesday, March 9th, but of course that's, we will shoot for the week therein. So, let's see here. What week do you say you're supposed to be in? Midterm, week 10. That's well, we're technically on week 6. That pushes it quite late. Well,
is it March 9 or will it change?
Well, there seems to be contradictory information inside of the syllabus, so.
March 9th is like a Sunday.
Yeah. That was made for a previous edition. So this is supposed to be week 10 for the midterm, week 14 for the final. According to the modules, we're currently in week 7, which would mean that the midterm should be occurring in 3 weeks, but I think that's probably leaving it too late. Because that would make it like 2 weeks before exam week, I think, or 2 or 3 weeks before exam week, just too late in the semester. So, I think it is reasonable that we should have the midterm not next week, but the following week. So, I am going to set the date for the midterm right here, right now. We will have it March 10th. Is that acceptable? I mean, insofar as we have to have a test, we should have it at some time. So, do you feel like that gives you enough adequate time to prepare?
We do have another midterm that day also, but it's for like a really easy class. I don't think it'll be too hard.
Okay.
Which class is that?
The one after this one, information management.
Oh, is it March 10?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Okay.
That's what I have on my calendar.
Well, we're kind of like, I don't have enough time in the 1-hour class to give you guys a midterm.
I don't think it'll be a problem. The other class is not super complicated.
Okay, well, we can always put it to a vote. All in favor of making March 10th the date of the midterm, given that you guys also have another test for a somewhat less complicated class the same day. Are you guys okay with me putting it there, even though you have another test that day? Fine with it? Any major objections? Okay. Well, in that case, I will put it in the announcements. It shall be, there we go, midterm date. We shall hold it Monday, March 10th at 12 p.m. PM. There we go. Good. So this week is a bit of a lighter week in terms of material, but given that we have the midterm coming up, I might push through some of next week's material as well so that we have some time for review next week. Acceptable plan? Good. So we are going to have the midterm. I see that I've received some assignment 2 submissions, so thank you for those. They will be graded this week, as well as whatever assignment 1s are remaining. Let's take a look at our upcoming assignment schedule. Here we go. Let's take a look at assignment 3, patient back-end form validation. So, they say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. You'll find that this assignment feels fairly similar to assignment 2. They're both attempting to do similar things. In the case of assignment 2, you were performing front-end validation in JavaScript. So if people, had a particular combination of options that they picked, they got X, Y, or Z as their suggested symptom. In this case, the front end is just the front end. All of that businessy decision logic will be taking place in PHP rather than JavaScript. This is generally the way that things are done in industry because stuff happening on the server is not vulnerable to people hacking it, right? Anytime you're dealing with actual sensitive information, you will most likely be doing so on the server rather than on the client. So, create a web application that allows for patient data entry with back-end form validation done in PHP. Create a file called patient.php that, when placed in the htdocs folder of an XINF installation, can be loaded in the browser at the URL localhost/patient.php. So write me a PHP script. When the web application is first loaded, a form should appear on the page with the following inputs. In addition to a submit button and a random button, the validation requirement for each input is also given. So you must have the following form elements. You need first name, must be made up of a series of letters and between 2 and 20 characters in length. That is what you are validating. Last name, same requirements as first name. Health card number must be of the format 4 numbers, 3 numbers, 3 numbers, 2 letters. X's indicate digits, 0 to 9, and A characters represent letters capital A to capital Z. Those are your validation requirements for the health card. You may find the following PHP functions useful: C-type digit and C-type alpha. C-type digit is a PHP function which allows you to check to see if a character is a digit or not. It takes in, you would provide it, the specific character. It outputs a Boolean value, true or false, telling you if it's a digit or not. C-type alpha does the same thing, except it checks for alphabetic characters. The point of this is to avoid any situations where you're saying like char equals 0 or char equals 1 or char equals 2, right? Now, as beginning programmers, you will very likely do that at some point, but you never have to, right? You're kind of not a programmer until you've written like a Boolean expression in an if statement that takes like about 6 or 7 lines and is just a bunch of conjoined, individual statements like that. It's kind of like one of those rites of passage, the same as like having a whole list of variables, var1, var2, var3, var4, var5, that you should make into an array, but you're not thinking that way yet. It's one of those rites of passage. Also, date of birth. Use an HTML date picker as a form input element. The date year must be before the current year. Ooh. Why would he ever put the current year in an assignment? Oh, that's so horrible. You can tell I read this through, right? There we go. We have updated to current year. So there you go. These are your requirements for the form. Once again, these things need to be checked in the back end rather than in the front end. This needs to be checked on the PHP side, not on the JavaScript side. You are also required to use Bootstrap to style the form. Make it look nice, make it look pretty. When the submit button is clicked, the data in the form should be sent to the same PHP script called patient.php. So this is an example of a script that contains an element that sends data to the same script element. When the form is submitted and one or more validation errors exist, display an unordered list of those errors that have occurred below the form. For example, if the person entered their last name and health card number incorrectly, but everything else was fine, the unordered list would look like this. 2 bullets, 2 validation error messages. Does that make sense? When the form is submitted and no validation errors occur, the message patient data entered correctly should be displayed below the form. So, if everything is entered correctly, you give like a little nice little, hooray, you did the thing. Otherwise, show the errors. Now, it kind of feels like this should connect up to a database where we would, in theory, be logging these things for safekeeping or use in the future. But, of course, we are not there yet. We have not gotten that far in the course yet, although we will be doing so in the next couple of weeks. So, don't worry about it. We'll be doing databases soon enough. Next week, I think we're doing SQL, actually. So, or possibly this week. So, there is also supposed to be a quote-unquote random button in addition to the submit button. Where were we? The random button, if the random button is clicked, an AJAX request should take place to this script random.php. Download the existing script. Please do not write your own. You may if you wish, I suppose, but The script will return a random first name, last name, and health card number, and a random date of birth. Use jQuery to set the form inputs to the values provided by this script. We will be covering how to do AJAX requests today. So, submit your solution in a zip file called as3.zip. The instructor will unzip your solution and copy your files to the htdocs folder on their computer to run your application. So, if you could, please, if any of you remember to do this, If you could throw your student number or your name into the name of the zip file as well, that would help me. My workflow might be a little bit different from Kevin's. I would appreciate that. So the mark breakdown for this tool. So, points for HTML form and bootstrap styling, 10. Handling PHP requests is 20. When I say handling, I mean, does the, have you correctly set up communication between the form and the PHP script, right? So that's like, are you reading from the get parameters? Are you performing your filtering operations correctly? That sort of thing. PHP request handling, next one. Form validation checking. These are points for all of these guys, all of these points here, right? Error list success message. Do you output the errors or success message as given in the description? 20 points. 10 points for your AJAX request for the random button, and jQuery to set the form input values, another 10 points, leaves you 100. Now, I believe, if I remember correctly, on assignment 2, jQuery was optional. Am I right? So on this one, if you're doing anything not related to the randomize button, you are permitted to use vanilla JavaScript, although you shouldn't need to. In this one, the JavaScript that you're writing should be limited to the randomize button and populating the fields. So, to make a long story not much shorter, if you add extra JavaScript of your own to do something interesting that you feel is good for the assignment, that is permitted to be vanilla JavaScript with no jQuery, but for the form functionality, please use jQuery for that. Okay? Are there any questions about the assignment? All right. So, good. Grief, Adobe. Nobody cares, Adobe. Get out of here. Go. F. No. It's the hotkey. They always make this more difficult than it needs to be. Well, that's going to have to do. So, these are topics that we already have discussed in class. PHP input validation. However, given that this is a fairly major component of assignment 3, and also a fairly major component of PHP programming in general, it behooves us to go over this material once again in some detail. So, recall the means by which the client sends information to the server, right? When the client makes a request to the server, we are, in general, requesting a particular file, at least in the sort of web classic sense. When we request a file, it is possible for us to attach additional information to that request in the form of get or post parameters. Does anybody remember the difference between get and post parameters? get is public, post is private. A somewhat more technical way of saying that, when you attach get parameters to a request, those parameters appear in the URL of the request. That is to say, in the unencrypted header of the packet. Because it's in the unencrypted region of the packet, anybody who is sort of intercepting or passing that packet along has full view of the contents of the packet. So, basically, the videos that you're watching on YouTube, even if you're in private mode on your browser, basically, while your computer may not be keeping a history of your browsing habits, your ISP certainly has all of that information. ISP is Internet Service Provider, and any of the nodes that your packet passes through to reach your computer, they also know everything that you're doing. So, get parameters. The post parameters keep their information in the encrypted payload. So, the region of the packet which is encrypted contains the post parameters. This means that nodes in the network that your packet transmits through cannot view information you have sent by post. So, of the two of these, which do we use for login? Post. That's right, because of course, login credentials are extremely sensitive information. So, good. We can use the global, the global super globals, the super global arrays underscore get, post, and request to get request parameters. However, we often need to check if the values we've received are valid. So, essentially, all of the information that you will be receiving, either via get or via post, is transferred in one data type. Does anybody know what data type is used for packets? If you were to pick a C# data type that represented the contents of a packet, which would it be? String is correct. The data packet is a string. This is how it's been encoded. The only time this isn't the case is when the part of the packet that is a string tells tells us that the payload is encoded as binary information. This is how things like videos and images and sound files are transferred. But in general, the default mode of an HTTP packet is string data, which means that our get and our post parameters are string data by default. So, the question then becomes, what if we want an integer? Well, minimally, if we are receiving an integer from a get parameter, it's going to be character encoded. And that's assuming we even get what we want. Recall that the client, all of the information on the client is fully exposed to the end user. And end users can be a nasty bunch. People who are trying to hack your website are end users, right? They have full access to all of your HTML, all of your CSS, and all of your JavaScript. Full access and full ability to modify them. So when we write a form, we set it up nicely so that the form elements match the data types of the things we expect to send. A good example of this in assignment 3, when we have the date of birth field, we're using a calendar widget in order to accomplish that. In theory, the calendar widget constrains the date of birth field so that it can't be anything else. But it totally can. Anybody with sufficient imagination can go into the packet, modify what the date of birth string looks like, make it so that it's not even a calendar date string at all. They can put the word potato in. All of these things. The information that gets sent from the client to the server can be intercepted, modified, etc. This doesn't even have to happen on your own computer. If it's a get parameter and it passes through a network node that perhaps belongs to someone a bit sinister, the network node can choose to modify the packet before it sends it along if it's been configured by someone who knows what they're doing. This is generally termed a man-in-the-middle attack, right? There's really no way to disrupt this when it comes to get parameters because all of the information is public. Now you can get a certain degree, you can get a certain ways to validating things using things like checksums, but that's kind of beyond the scope of where we are. Suffice to say, any node in the network can modify a packet. If the interesting information is encrypted, they cannot modify the packet meaningfully. So it just ends up garbled on the other end if they try, right? So basically, long story short, we can do everything we like in our JavaScript and our HTML to try to make sure that people are not misusing the form, misusing the website, but ultimately, there's no way to prevent them from doing so on the client. There's no way to prevent people from sending us bad information because they can do so intentionally. So, what we need to do, and you must always do this, you must filter on the server to make sure that the values you're receiving are good and valid. Good, valid, and not containing scripting attacks. Hackers can enter script elements into forms and attempt to run malicious code on people's computers. This is typically what's going on in a phishing email. So on a phishing email, there will be links, really scuzzy, scummy looking links, http:// some domain, and then like a whole lot of random characters, right? If you take these random characters, any resemblance to any really existing languages is purely coincidental. If you take the seemingly random characters that are attached to the phishing link and you decode them in a particular way that it will be done by a website, these can just straight up contain HTML elements like the script. Source is equal to http://badsite.com/hack.php or hack.js. And script. When inserted into a website, that code will execute and can do a fairly large amount of damage. Now, there are a couple of different ways that code can be injected in this manner. The one that we've kind of been talking about so far is called the reflected cross-site scripting attack. So when you click on the bad link, someone else's JavaScript will run on your on the web page that you load. The web page itself will often be the correct website that this hacker has found a vulnerability in. So if it's a fake email from your bank, you click on the link, it is your bank's website. But because your bank's website has a vulnerability in it, when you enter your username and password, this script is running and watching, basically, and keeping track of what your username and password is and sending that off to the hacker. That's one example of something that can happen with something like this. The other thing that a hacker can do when they run their JavaScript on your machine, in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be talking about sessions, and we'll be talking about session cookies. How many people know what a cookie is? Not like a baked cookie, but like a cookie on a computer. Yeah. What's a cookie?
It's essentially like a marker on your computer, so you can bookmark the data that the website was using.
Yes. So, yes and no. Like the cookie itself is actually literally just a string. All of the tracking is done by like the internet apparatus, right? We'll be getting into like how cookies work and what they are in a couple of weeks' time. But one of the things that cookies are very often used for is indicating that a computer is logged in, right? These are called session validation cookies, right? So HTTPS, is a stateless, it's a stateless format, right? This means that if I am a server, all I do is listen for packets and serve them, right? I do not remember different computers, right? For example, let's say I have my server, I have computer A, or I have client A and I have client B, right? Let's say that first, A sends a request for file.html, right? The server says, okay, A request, actually it says, okay, there's a request, here's the response, and it sends file.html as a response, right? If then B makes a request all it sees is, oh, here's another request, here's the response. Here you go. Here's your response. The server doesn't know that this request originated with this computer and that this request originated with this computer. As far as the server is concerned, both requests could have come from A, both requests could have come from B, it could have been B then A, it could have been A then B. The server does not remember who connected in what order, right? Unless they have cookies. So the purpose of the cookie is to say, oh, I have a cookie. The cookie says ID equals 7. So this is person 7 that's attempting to connect. The cookies get sent automatically with the request packets. So if client with ID 7 attempts to reconnect to the server, it will see, oh, ID 7. I see that you've been here before. So these cookies are used to implement sessions. When you log in to a website, you have created a valid session, right? Using a cookie most frequently. You can do other implementations, but this is the way pretty much everybody does it. So, one of the things that a hacker can do, cookies are strings, basically encryption keys, that are stored on your machine. If the cookie corresponds to a valid session according to the server, taking that cookie string, copying it, and sending it to another computer means that you now have two computers that the server thinks are the same computer. Right? You can imagine if this computer's ID is 7 and this computer's ID is 5, the server can tell them apart. Right? It's like, oh, this is a request from 7, this is a request from 5, okay, those are different guys, I do different things with them, right? But if these two have the same identification number, the server is back in a position where it cannot tell the difference between the two of them. And that is what hackers are attempting to do a lot of the time. It's called session hijacking, and the way that a session hijack works is you get JavaScript to run on somebody's computer, which steals their ID number for a valid login session. The hacker transfers that to their own machine, attempts to, do stuff with your account that they shouldn't be able to do because they have your login session. Does that make sense? This is why a lot of websites will have you re-log in if you're attempting to make any major account changes like changing your password, right? If a hacker has stolen the session cookie, they are not actually in possession of your login credentials, right? All they've done is hijacked an existing session. They haven't, they haven't stolen your credentials. They don't have the ability to establish a new valid session. They can only hijack an existing one. So, if the website requires you to enter your password again to change your password, the hacker doesn't have your password, right? So they can't change your password. So it's protection against session hijacking. Does that make sense? But all of this nastiness is made possible by a website itself if it leaves vulnerabilities where it allows people to enter scripts as parameters and then just faithfully executes them. So, Rejection. Let me try that again. Zap. There we go. So, now, validating inputs is cumbersome, takes a lot of if statements. This is an example. This is an example of a validation that doesn't even filter out scripts, right? The isSet function in PHP checks to see if an element of an array exists or not. So if the server fails to, or if the client fails to send this parameter, not isSet will pick that up. In this case, the variable a is being written with null. The second clause here checks to see if the given element is not a string. Now, I would argue that perhaps this is a little bit silly, as they're always going to be strings. That's what's stored in the get parameter. But you can imagine this being is integer reasonably easily. Otherwise, we write the value into a. This, again, is not even checking for script tags. The filter input function takes input, it makes input validation much, much easier. This is the current and appropriate way of performing input validation in PHP. Now, if you are the type of person who uses external aids to help complete assignments, I would ask you to be very careful on this point. And this is not even just like a don't use ChatGPT thing, although it is also a don't use ChatGPT thing. So if you look on the internet for how to do this, many of the articles that you will find on the internet will suggest ways of doing this that are old and not as secure as doing it this way. Much of the articles, basically these same articles were used to train the stupid chatbot on how to address this specific issue. So, when you use the infernal chatbot, you're kind of rolling the dice on whether you're going to get information that's current or not, right? So, there is, as far, like, normally, I try to allow my students a certain degree of creative freedom when coming up with their programs. But in this case, there is no creative freedom whatsoever. You will use filter input or it is wrong. This is the only current and valid way to do things in PHP. Okay? Everything else has security vulnerabilities. So, the use of filter input, I'm pretty sure we did, I showed you examples of it last class, didn't I? Filter input? Yeah. So, in general, it takes 3 inputs. Type tells you where to look for the parameter, either input get or input post. Name tells you the name of the parameter that you're looking for, and for example, first name. And flag gives you what sort of validation you are performing here, whether you are validating booleans or integers or sanitizing strings. Now, there are also a couple of other related functions, which I would love to show you. PHP.net. Filter var. Oh, wait, that's not it. Filter var. There we go. Thank you. So, have you ever wanted to use filtering operations, but not on something that has been derived from a superglobal input array, well, my friends, you may also use the exact same filtering operations on just regular variables using filter var. It is the same as filter input insofar as its outputs and the exact forms of the filtering that it performs. The only difference is it does not require specifying input get or input post. Instead, you plop in the variable that you want to filter. So filter var is a variant on filter input that applies to variables rather than inputs. This is going to be more interesting once we get into databases, because you also have to filter stuff coming in from databases, right? But that gets dumped in as a variable rather than getting dumped in as a superglobal, right? So, in addition, you also have filter variable array, which performs the same filtering step, but over all of the elements of an array. You also have filter input array, which does the same thing, but basically filters the entire input superglobal at once rather than doing each one sequentially. The trick with this one's not quite so useful as it might seem. When you're dealing with an array inside of a, like your own native data structure array, very often all of the values in that array will be of the same type, right? You will have an array of integers. You will have an array of strings. You will have an array of booleans. When it comes to the input arrays, your arrays will very often be mixed, right? You'll have some integers, some floats, some strings. You can't guarantee that the whole input array is going to be monotyped. So this thing assumes that it's monotyped, which it may be less useful for that reason. Does that make sense? However, if it does apply to your situation, it will save you about maybe 3 or 4 lines of code of doing like 4 of these. You can do one of the array ones instead. I've never really seen programs take many more than like 3 or 4 get parameters practically, but you can have quite a few post parameters sometimes. But yeah. Good. Any questions so far? Okay. So. Ooh, this is out of date. That's out of date. That's not the one to use. The correct filter for strings is filter underscore sanitize underscore special chars. Sanitized string is actually in the process of being deprecated. So, y'all know what deprecated means? It'll be our word of the day. Deprecate. 1, to express disapproval of. What I deprecate is persistent indulgence. Or to disparage or belittle something. However, sub-definition, chiefly of a software feature, be usable but regarded as obsolete and best avoided, typically due to having been superseded. This feature is deprecated and will be removed in later versions. This is the situation that filter sanitized string is currently in. So, use this one, not this one, The other ones are fine. There are a whole lot of validate filters, including validate float and validate bool, which allow you to validate, non-string data types. Those are my recommendations. You can also validate strings to make sure that they are, for example, legal email addresses, which is useful because otherwise it's just kind of a chore, right? So, let us discuss the return value. The return value of filter input is one of the trickier parts of it. So, we're going to, once again, need to understand the difference between weak and strong equality comparison. So let's do a quick recap of that. Does anybody remember the difference between weak and strong equality comparison in both JavaScript and PHP? They both function in the same way in this manner. Does anybody remember weak and strong equality? Yes?
Like and or?
Nope, not and and or. Wow, it is strongly a Monday, isn't it? Yeah.
Monday after a week off.
Monday after the worst possible Monday. And even worse, it's like kind of nice out today relative to how it's been. So it's like, All right, so weak versus strong equality. Recall that in C#, the way that you test to see if two values are equal to each other is using this operator, right? Distinguishing itself from the single equals operation. What is this? What does this one do? Assignment, that's right. What does this one do? What is that?
Comparison?
It is comparison, yes. It's equality comparison specifically. So if the value of the variable x is 5, this returns true, otherwise it returns false. Sorry, in formal logic, false is an upside down T. There we go. So, in PHP and JavaScript, we also have dun da 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 dun dun da 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 dun dun da 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 dun, triple equals. Prior to now, this hasn't really mattered that much, but once we get into filter input, this actually starts to matter. So the difference between these things can be demonstrated reasonably simply using the JavaScript interpreter built into your standard web page. So, if, for example, I said 5 is equal to 5, this is true. If I said 5 is equal to the string 5, this is also true. Now, this would never pass muster in C#. In C#, this would be a type incompatibility error, because you are simply not permitted to compare strings directly to numbers without having converted one of the two of them first. However, JavaScript, being a loose language, loosely weakly typed language, badly typed language, one might even say, this is true. However, under strict equality, that is no longer true. So the difference between weak equality and strong equality in both JavaScript and PHP. Weak equality will attempt to perform equality comparison across type boundaries, whereas strong equality will not. Strong or strict equality will say, what do you mean about this? This is an integer, that's a string. I don't even have to look at the values to tell you that ain't the same. Whereas this one's like, well, you know, they do have the same value even though the types are completely incompatible. So I guess we could say that's true. So in general, this one is a better analog for how equality comparison works in C# than this one. This is actually the equality that you all know and love from last semester. It's hiding. It's hiding inside of an extra equal sign. This one does a lot of strange things. Among the strange things that it does, so in PHP, can I pull up a PHP interpreter? There you go. So increase the magnification. There we go. So this is just a quick little online PHP interpreter. It does the same thing as, you know, running it through XINF. It's just a little faster. So if x is equal to, or suppose I have to establish it first, x is equal to 5. If x is equal to 5, note that this uses weak equality. Echo weakness is strength. Else echo strength is strength. Which is just a little joke. If we run this, I'm not sure where we're running actually. Parse error. What? Semicolons. Okay. So you can see under this, weakness is strength. So this evaluates under weak comparison. If we tighten that up, restrict that, then it's not. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. For example, null and false. So you can see from our output here, null and false equate to each other under weak equality. So null equals false. Weakly equals false. Null also weakly equals 0, which also weakly equals false. So this becomes a problem. The filter input function will return null, false, and possibly 0 under different circumstances, all from the same function as the output return value, and it won't tell you which one. You're just going to have to test for it. So, filter input will return null if the input parameter has simply not been provided. You can imagine all of your get parameters are being sent forth to the server. If one of those get parameters just simply isn't there, the filter input that looks for it will return null. False will be returned if the value exists, but it fails validation. So, imagine we are looking for an integer. If the get parameter's value is not an integer, but is rather something like the string potato, this will cause the validation stage to fail. If the validation stage fails, we get false. And further, the value that is sent from the user might be a valid integer, but that integer happens to be the number 0. So even when the form is sent out correctly, it might tell us there's an error if we are not testing our equality with sufficient strictness. So, whenever we are doing this, we must use 3 equal signs, not 2 equal signs. Okay? Any questions about that? So, I'd like to give a quick demo of this. Let me make a file, call this input.php. Ooh, I need XAMPP. XAMPP. Thank you, XAMPP. Let's make a new folder. Go. So, when we make a PHP script, we of course always start with the opening and closing PHP tags. There we go. So let's imagine that we are writing this PHP script, which takes from the user a, let's say, an input parameter called name from the get superglue. Get name, and let's assign that to a variable name. Now, let's echo hello. Name. Actually, I'll have to do compact version. Name. How are you? Very quick website. If we go to local host 1080, the dashboard is there. Input.php. Object not found. What do you mean? Oh yeah, there's a. I put put it in a subfolder, didn't I? 2025-02-24/input.ph. Well, let me try that one more time.
You have it as 2024.
I do have it. Oh man, it's pretty late in the year to be making that mistake. There we go. There we go. Input.ph. So if I just load the script, it says I'm looking for a parameter that doesn't exist. This is stupid. So let's give it the parameter and assume that it'll work. Or see if it works, I suppose. Name is equal to, hello Nick, how are you? Very good. But, what if, dun 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 dun, I'm a naughty, naughty boy. Script. Script. Alert. Hacked. Boom. So the reason that this works, when PHP writes something into the website, that thing can include HTML tags, right? Because as far as the client is concerned, it's not even aware that PHP made any modifications, right? Any tags that are in there will be faithfully executed by the client. So this is a hack. There are slightly less malicious ways of doing this. Like, you can do strong. There you go. You can insert any HTML tags, right? It's just that script, because it executes JavaScript, is particularly malicious. So the question is, how do we not have that happen? Well, that's right, I changed the folder name, didn't I? There we go. By using filter input. Filter underscore input, we then select where the value is coming from. Input underscore get. We select the name, in this case it's just name, and then we select the filter type. In our case, that's going to be filter underscore sanitize underscore special underscore chars. There we go. Now, let's take a look at the website and see what's changed. So now, rather than executing, the HTML tags appear rendered in the website. So what has essentially happened is the sanitization filter has taken characters which are normally associated with HTML code, not just plain text, but like things that designate tags, and has substituted them for characters that will not be rendered they will not appear as HTML, but as text. Although I believe if you copy these characters, they do have the same ASCII value, but we've used a different format to send these characters. This is actually fully viewable if you take a look at the packet. If we capture the packet, take a look at the payload. Oh, come on. Yeah, there it is. The actual response, you can see that the opening and closing angle braces have been replaced with these character set, these symbols, strings of characters, which themselves do not constitute HTML, but will render as those symbols. So this is how you defeat scripting attacks. Does this make sense? Good. Further, so let's imagine, let's do a new one. Let's do a new filter that's looking for an integer. Filter, validate, int. There we go. So, if we take a look, before I go that far actually, let's just read it directly and see what we can do with that. So in this case, we are expecting age to be an integer. This is a requirement that we have in our head that we have not yet encoded in the program because I commented this bit out. So, if here we add age is equal to and 37 as my actual age. There you go. But if I were to say something like none of your business, that also comes through. Now we are expecting an integer and we are not getting an integer, so we need to do something about that. This is where the filtering step comes in. With the filter enabled, you can see that if it's not an integer, it doesn't print anything at all. Now, because we have entered something in that's not an integer, the return result of filter input will be null, false, or an integer? False. Very good. False, as I hope we remember from previously, prints as an empty string in PHP, which is stupid, but that's the way it does it. So we can write a series of if statements to capture what's going on here. So if age is strongly equal to false, well, let's do weak for now. Weakly equal to false. Age can be equal to invalid, just like that. So now we get invalid if this is not an integer, but if it is an integer, we get the integer. Now, the problem, like, if we leave off age entirely, we still get invalid, which is technically true. The parameter was not provided, therefore it was invalid, but we can give somewhat more specific feedback on this point. else if age is equal to null, age is equal to not provided. But now, despite the fact that we have not provided it, not provided does not appear here, invalid appears here. Another little bit of nastiness. If, my age is not 0, but there is a person in the room whose age is 0, so there you go. 0 also shows up as invalid, which of course, an aged 0 person is as much a person as anybody else, so their age should be valid. This is happening because we are performing weak equality here. If we tighten this up to strong equality, everything will work. So if age is false, this equates to true, and this is printed. If age is equal to null, this equates as true, and this is printed. If age is equal to 0, this equates as true, and this is printed. So, if we just simply tighten this up to strict equality, 0 comes through as 0 and not an error. But in PHP, this is not optional knowledge. You must know this in order to be able to filter and validate inputs correctly. Any questions? Okay. Shall we move on? And now for something completely different. So, Ajax. And I am not talking about the famous hero of the Trojan War. Ajax is an acronym. It stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, or perhaps JSON and XML. The J might also be an acronym, but XML is also, no, it is asynchronous JavaScript. Okay, so asynchronous JavaScript and XML. You don't really have to worry about XML. So XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. It is the basis on which HTML was designed. So if you take a look at older Microsoft Office formats before they started encrypting everything, you will find that they actually quite strongly resemble an HTML document. Basically, in the sort of 80s / early 90s, XML was the popular thing for encoding formats. After the invention of JavaScript, we had JavaScript object notation, or JSON, which I think I've talked about JSON in this class, have I? Yeah. So JSON format sort of arose kind of as a competitor to XML, but technically every time you're sending HTML around, it's actually XML. So yeah, but anyway. So AJAX allows clients to make HTTP requests to the server asynchronously without causing the page to reload. So that part is critical, without causing the page to reload. By the way, for this topic, we're back in JavaScript land. We are setting PHP to the side for a moment. We are back talking about JavaScript. So, does anybody here remember what happens to your stored variables in JavaScript when you reload the page? Anybody? Someone out there? Refreshes the variable. Yes. Deletes all the memory. Yes. So when we reload a page, it wipes everything clean, right? Maybe you don't want to wipe everything clean. Maybe you want to get some additional data from the server without destroying everything. That's what AJAX is for. So AJAX allows us to connect back to the server again, request additional data, without, if it's designed well, without interrupting the user's experience of the web page. You have a question, sir?
Yeah. So if I'm like entering a form, you have to enter your email, your address, all that, and then you accidentally scroll up and refresh the page, AJAX is meant to keep your information in the next box.
See, that's a client-side concern. So, no. If anything is keeping your form data filled in while you through a reload, that would be your browser picking up a little bit of the slack. So imagine you've got a social media feed, right? Here's a question. How long can you scroll before you have to reload the page? It's infinite. But here's a question. Do you think that your phone or your computer has downloaded an infinity of posts for you to view? Probably not, right? So the way that it actually works, social media website, whatever, y.com or whatever, it might load, 30, 40 posts at a time. Loads those into your client. As you're scrolling through, if you are getting close to the end of the posts that you have downloaded from the server, it sends a sneaky little AJAX request out to request the next 30 from the server, right? It then populates your client with them automatically so that you get the illusion of a continuous scroll, right? And that's how it actually works. And it also, you may notice that scrolling back up through, sometimes there's a bit of a lag, right? So it's interesting, right? Like the timeout is designed for people looking forward through the feed, which, I'm sure they've done many, many studies about the amount of time it takes someone to scroll forward through a feed. But when you're scrolling backwards through a feed, you're not reviewing every post the way that you are when you're going down. You're often get me back to the top. You're right? And so the system has trouble keeping up with going that fast, right? Because you're not even looking at them. You're just, get me back that way, right? So that's, so AJAX, that's a better idea of what AJAX is for. I want more data. I want one of two things. I want more data from the server, or I want to send data to the server. Does that make sense?
Yeah, when you get to the end, your client gets an AJAX request.
Mm-hmm. Yes. All AJAX requests, like all requests in general, originate in the client, right? The server can't make requests. Only clients can make requests. Does that make sense? Good. Any other questions? Those are good questions. Hmm? Well. Welcome. How was your break?
It was good.
Good. We're talking about AJAX requests. So, I'm just going to do my own diagram. I like doing diagrams. I'll do you a diagram, just because I like it. So similarly to regular, normal client-server communication, the AJAX request is a communication between a client and a server. Most useless sentence of the class gotten out of the way. There we go. So during this sort of communication protocol, including AJAX requests, you kind of have to have something to begin with before you can make any AJAX requests. Like, you have to load the page first, right? So the first transaction will be something like request index page, index.html, right? Server will send back the response. There will most of the time be a couple more responses sent back and forth to load page assets, images, CSS, JavaScript, all of that stuff. That will be subsequent communication of that nature, right? Request, CSS, response, request, JavaScript, response, right? So once the web page is fully loaded and everything is up and running, the JavaScript at intervals will send requests to the server to either request information from the server or update the server with information. So you'll get an AJAX request, which will have a response. Now, in contrast to all of these series of communications, the AJAX request will only very rarely be requesting a whole file, right? With all of these are generally, not exclusively, but generally whole file transactions, right? With AJAX requests, you are requesting a much smaller piece of data most of the time. This often comes encoded in JSON. In theory, other formats are acceptable as well, but just to keep things simple for this class, because we're trying to move through this material reasonably quickly, I'll be talking primarily about JSON, right? So JSON is a way of taking data structures, encoding them as strings, sending them out over HTTP packets and responses. So AJAX requests may or may not have additional parameters attached, the same way that these guys did. So this guy, the initial request, It might have get parameters, it might have post parameters, right? AJAX requests also might have get and post parameters. They are HTTP requests in a proper sense. In fact, the server cannot tell when a request is an AJAX request and when it's from a URL address bar or when it's from clicking a link somewhere. The server cannot distinguish between each of these different types of requests. The only thing it can do is to serve the thing that's requested. So, in a sense, the thing that the AJAX request is targeting forms a part of the API of the server. You guys know what APIs are? It's a term you're likely to hear very frequently as you go up through things. API stands for Application Programming Interface. So the idea is that a web server provides certain software functions, and similarly to calling a method in C# or calling a function in PHP or JavaScript, all you need to do is send it a request with a certain amount of data. It behaves like a function, sends you some data back, right? It's a way of doing function calls over the internet. That's kind of the very rough idea of what an API is, right? So when we make an AJAX request, in this class, since we're doing PHP, we will be doing requests to specific PHP files. So we might request, get state.php, for example. Make sense? I'd like to show you a live example. This is a fun little example that I put together for my JavaScript class a little while ago now. Still demonstrates the concept though. It's up on my CS Unix thing.
Where did I put it?
Yeah, there it is. Winter 2023. Yeah, there we go. Honor system tic-tac-toe. So, I would encourage any one of you, please load up this URL, and you will be able to see from the front end what AJAX is capable of. You need me to blow it up? There. So, Honor System Tic-Tac-Toe is a game where basically any logged in client decides whether they are X or O. Anybody can reset the game at any time, and anybody can make any move at any time. There you go. So, as you can see, this is definitely Honor System Tic-Tac-Toe. The only, basically I just did a very, very bare bones implementation, and the only rule I put in was that you can't overwrite a square with a square that's occupied. So, I win. I have no honor. So, the way that this thing works, right? It's making AJAX requests to PHP scripts on the server, which are all interacting with a common data file. That's the reason that the tic-tac-toe game on all of your screens is the same as the one that's on my screen. If we take a look at the network traffic here, well, first you can see that it's polling the game state about every half second. If we take a look at the contents of one of those packets, we have JSON data. Now, within the game's internal representation, X is X, O is O, and N is question mark. It's like nothing, N for nothing. So that is how the game is synchronizing across all of your computers. It's not like the server is like reaching out and pushing the game state to everybody who's connected. That's not how the internet works. The clients are responsible for checking in with the server to see if there are any updates to the game. All communication initiates with the client, right? So, would you guys like a brief tour of the source code? So I will, let me just get PuTTY up and operational. There we go. Oh man. Give me a moment. Pretty sure I can set the preference to increase the script font size. Appearance. Oh. Text. Ah, there it is. Yeah, I don't know who set 10-point font as the default, but oh my goodness. There we go. That's a little better. There we go. So, let me kill the lights so you can see a little better. So, if I navigate to the folder that contains the tic-tac-toe example, it's at public HTML / winter 2023 / Ajax examples / example 6. There we go. These are all of the files that make the game possible. I have the index page. I have a JavaScript file which controls the AJAX requests. And then I have 3 PHP scripts, game state, reset, and send move, as well as a data file, tic-tac-toe data, which is, that is the game as saved on the server. So if, for example, I view the contents of tic-tac-toe, there you go. Somebody make a move. Did somebody make a move?
Yeah.
There you go. You can see that the state of this file on the server is updated in accordance with the moves that are being made. Right? Make sense? So let's take a look at GameState.php. It's relatively simple. We haven't done file I/O yet, but fopen, fgetcsv, these are functions which read the state of the file into data, store it in variables, and I'm in fact pushing it into an array called result, which I'm just JSON encoding and firing off to the client. So this is literally just reading the contents of the file and echoing it. This is actually doing more than it probably needs to. That's okay. I've learned a bit about PHP since I wrote these. Reset.php simply it opens the file again, writes the sort of blank state of the file, which is all ends, into the file, closes the file, that resets the game. Anytime anybody updates to look for the new state of the file, what they will find once reset has been executed is that the old data is gone, the ends are now in place. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. And then we have the interesting one. Oh, yes, question.
Does every PHP file have to be separate? You wouldn't just do it in one and like implement it almost like functions?
That is an excellent question. This is the way that PHP prefers to be used. It is certainly possible to take all of these functions and integrate them as one big PHP file. However, the typical design pattern for PHP is something we call file level modularity, which basically means that we are, similarly to this example, we are thinking of each PHP file as being a distinct and complete operation, like one operation, right? What this does is it prevents us from having to send a lot of extra data along with the request to specify the nature of the request. So it simplifies things on the client and it simplifies things on the server. We're kind of like, when we're working with PHP, we're almost not even working in an object-oriented language. PHP doesn't really like to think of itself as being object-oriented. It's sort of, well, it only recently got objects, for example, only as of PHP version 5, which I guess isn't that recently, but PHP is an old, crusty language. It's mostly an imperative language, actually. You'll notice that we haven't really even been declaring functions when we've been doing PHP so far. So what it uses instead is it's like, well, reset.php, that does one thing. It resets the game. I can call that function and it resets the game. That's sort of the level at which PHP likes to operate. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's not necessarily a good system, but it's been good enough historically that PHP for a reasonably long period of time was the go-to language for this type of operation. So let's take a look at the final one, which is the most complicated, send move. So send move is the one that actually retrieves some information from the server. You'll notice, I'm not doing my validation correctly, we are taking 3 get parameters, x, y, and val. These are the basically x and y positions in the grid, and whether you're writing an x or an O. We must load the state of the, we must load the state of the board. We then write the result in at the appropriate point, and then we then must write those changes back into the file. So it's both. So reset was just a plain write operation. Game state was just a plain read operation. Send move is a read modified write operation. It then also sends the updated board back to the client. Does this make sense? Sort of? And you can see that between these three PHP scripts, we get something that behaves quite dynamically, right? It's, you know, it's kind of a silly example, but it demonstrates all, like, this is all that's necessary in order to have, like, commonly held data that many people, an arbitrarily large number of people actually can operate on. Like, you can, in the past when I've shown this to people, people have been like, oh, all you would have to do is, like, take the grid and, like, blow it up by many, many positions. And instead of having X and O, change that to little colored squares. And suddenly you would have, like, a community painting program, right? Which is true. It would take only small modifications of this code to produce, like, an internet graffiti wall, right? So, yeah. Does that make sense? Are you folks getting kind of the flavor for what an AJAX request is and what it does? Hopefully. So, well, it is currently 1:48, which is around the middle of the class. What do you folks say we break now for our break? I wasn't even finished the sentence, and people already started stretching and groaning. Yes, okay. We'll have our break now, half an hour, and if you please be back here at, oh man, I guess that'd be 2:19, would it? Yeah. So 2:19, please be back. Thank you. Back to class. So, continuing on. By the way, if anybody feels like it's getting a little too warm in here, I can shut this off and then I'll turn on the heat. For some reason, this is an annual process in this room. So if anybody's getting too warm, just let me know. So, AJAX. So AJAX is what allows us to make web applications that feel more like desktop applications. Obviously, if your whole page had to refresh every time you required more information from the server, that would be less than ideal. In addition to the sort of social media scroll example of an AJAX application that we discussed before the break, we also have Google Maps and Google Docs as these are also good examples of AJAX applications. You know, in the same way that the social media feed will load more of the social media feed when you get to the bottom, get to or near the bottom of it. With Google Maps, like, it doesn't load. You'll notice that there are, like, a couple of different, like, resolution layers of Google Maps that, like, at a certain zoom level, you've popped from one type of map to another. Well, it's loading all of those dynamically as you're doing the, the pinch controls and that sort of thing. Google Docs is an interesting one as well, as this is synchronizing multiple users to be editing the same document at the same time. The way that they do this, if you've never used it, anybody here never used Google Docs? Has everybody used Google Docs at some point? So the way that they get multiple cursors for multiple people to operate all at the same time is that, you don't have direct control over the memory in the same way that you do, with Word. Every time you are entering information into the document, you are making a request to enter information into the document. Multiple requests can be handled simultaneously because of web architecture. That's how it handles it. So, it's actually quite a good system, Google Docs. Microsoft has been trying to get there for years. Ooh, did I actually? Yeah, I'm recording, aren't I? Yeah, I'm recording. Okay, good. So, Ajax requires front-end code to make requests and some kind of back-end resource to be returned as the request response. Either a PHP script, JSON data, or a text file, or something. So, Ajax requests are still just regular web requests. They are HTTP requests. This means that the default mode for them is, of course, I am requesting a file. Ajax requests can be used to request simply files, right? But the thing about Ajax requests, if the thing it's targeting is a PHP script, then you are essentially saying, I want this function, I want this script to run, and I want the output to be sent to me, right? So it's a way of executing code remotely on the server. Well, if nobody else is warm, I am, so I'm going to turn it off. If that's okay. If anybody gets cold, let me know. I'll turn it back on. So, it's possible to use Ajax without using jQuery or other front-end libraries like Fetch. A special object built into JavaScript assists in making Ajax requests, standardized during an earlier era of the web. However, it's far easier to use a framework and still safer in terms of cross-compatibility across browsers. These points are somewhat showing their age. Improved support for Ajax requests is something that JavaScript has added reasonably recently. So JavaScript now supports fetch requests, which are not too much more difficult than how you do them in jQuery. This is kind of another example of how updates to JavaScript over time and ECMAScript have gradually been eating jQuery's lunch. Everything good in jQuery is slowly but surely being made a part of vanilla JavaScript, making jQuery basically, at the moment jQuery is really just kind of a slightly more compact syntax for doing the same thing. Which is why you'll see a lot of articles about like how jQuery is dead. In fact, if I just Google it, hello computer. Oh, this is all stuff about a jQuery article. You know, in defense of jQuery, seems a little defensive. there you go. People ask, is jQuery still relevant in 2024? And you know, whenever you see a closed form question, you know that the answer is usually no. Why is jQuery not used anymore? Well, you know, it's because basically JavaScript's eaten its lunch. That being said, you'll still probably see quite a lot of it out there, so it's not completely irrelevant, so we will still teach it in this class. There we go. So, in jQuery, $.get makes an AJAX GET request. You can assume also that $.post makes a POST request. We then provide the URL, the data, basically a JSON object containing the parameters that we wish to send. We provide the function with a URL to request, a possible array representing our query string, and a success callback function that will handle the response. The callback function is provided with the response as an argument. We additionally specify the data type to expect in the response, for example, JSON, which will dictate how to interpret the format of the callback function parameter. So this is a little bit of a tripping hazard for people who are learning how to do AJAX. I said that for the primary part, the data that we will receive back from an AJAX request will typically be JSON data. However, it is not necessarily JSON data. Another example is it could be text data. You could also request an image by using an AJAX request. So it's necessary to specify what type of data you are expecting back from the server. So here is an example. .get myscript.php. We have then a a JavaScript object linking keys to values. These are your parameters. So in this case, these are the get parameters. Those would be encoded in the URL. And then the final argument of get is the callback function. This is most frequently done as an anonymous function. Did we talk about anonymous functions? Maybe? No? Okay. So, trying to think, do I want to spend that digression on anonymous functions, or am I just going to show you how to use regular ones? I'm just going to show you how to use regular ones. For example, let's say that we had on our server a text file view extensions, thank you very much. Rename hello.txt. The contents of this file shall be greetings from serverland. So let's now write a website that uses AJAX to fetch the contents of that file. New file, save as index.html. There we go. HTML. There we go. ajax.html. There we go. So let's now make, oh, not .html, .js, thank you. Thank you very much. So let's now make a new file. Save that as ajax.js. Let's keep the promise that we made to ourselves to call the file ajax.js. Now, because we're using jQuery, what do we also have to load?
You have to go online and get all the jQuery code.
Very yes. You must get the jQuery source code file and load it. jQuery. Get me the jQuery, please. Download. Download. There we go. All of that gobbledygook. Actually, just save. There we go. There we go. And now, before we do anything else, script source is equal to, what is the name of my file? That is correct. There we go. There we go. We have now loaded jQuery. So, my object with this example is to write an AJAX request targeting the text file that I have placed on the server, loading that and outputting it to the JavaScript console. That's all I want to do so far. So, get the URL that I want to specify. It's normally what you do is you specify a relative URL, so you're not going for the full HTTPS : etc. etc. This is prone to error and prone to bugs, as well as being, longer. Just state the file name. In our case, it is hello.txt, I believe. Yes, hello.txt. We are not sending any parameters, so I'm going to leave that empty, and then I need to do the callback function. So the callback function can be a function in the regular sense. Let's write a function callback, or let's say log callback, taking data text, maybe just txt, because that seems to be a reserved word. There we go. Now, I write a function which very simply takes the provided input, callback, and just logs it to console. Console.log txt. There we go. Now, in JavaScript, anywhere we require a function as an argument to another function, we provide that argument by stating the name of the function without providing without providing round braces. If I write log callback, I am referencing the function. If I write log callback with 2 round braces, I am calling the function. The function call will be executed before the GET request is executed, which is not what we're going for. Make sense? So, if I save that, let's take a look at our website that we've just written. There we go. So it's a blank page, but that's expected. We didn't put anything in the body. If we take a look, oh, syntax error, missing Ajax dot 6. Oh, yeah, I left that in. There we go. And also, that also needs a comma. So, I wish to take a very brief digression. I have a particular style when it comes to writing longer lists of arguments. This is my style. I picked this up from the programming language Haskell, which does things in this manner most of the time. So basically, like, if you have something like f of a, b, c, right? It's like sometimes easy if you're splitting these among different lines to get the, like, where the commas are supposed to be wrong. The sort of natural way of doing this would be f at a comma b comma c, and then typically the brace is on the next line, right? But this, like these ones have commas, but this one doesn't. It's not especially like copy pastable. So if you just move the commas to the beginning of the next line, you still have the right number of commas. Everything lines up in a very neat little row. It's very, very highly readable, and you'll never forget a comma again. So this is the way that I typically do things. I will admit that it is somewhat controversial. I've been told that this is a stupid way of doing things by other programming professors, but that's okay. If certain people see you do this, they'll be like, you had more, didn't you? But yeah, I like that, so you're welcome. This is my gift to you. I'm gifting you improved syntax. But yeah, so there we go. Let's try her out. Greetings from serverland. So the Ajax request has gone to the server, requested the file. The file is specifically that content, brings it back in, plunks it in there, and there we have it. Does that make sense? Thumbs up? Thumbs down? Does anybody have any specific questions? Yes?
So in the lecture slides, it says $.get, and then a round bracket, then a curly bracket.
Which one?
Yeah, just go up a little bit. Yeah, so are we missing a few of those?
This is probably alternate syntax for accomplishing the same thing. Maybe we have different ways of doing this in an example. Well, let's see. Let's see if we can duplicate that.
So I see the URL.
So basically that approach is create a big object, URL points to hello.txt. What was the next parameter?
Data.
yes, data will be empty.
Success.
Success is not even well defined in the slides, is it?
The success callback function that will handle the response.
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, yes, so that would be in this case log callback. And then the final one is like the data type. Data type, I guess, would be string. Let's see if this works, or if this gives us a syntax error. That doesn't work. So, all right. Don't look at this one. Don't look at it. Don't look at it. I don't know what the intent is with that, but that's like, I guess it's trying to tell you what it's accepting. Don't look at that one. That one doesn't work. Kevin. There. This one works. So this thing is an anonymous function. It's basically this, the idea is like if you took the function declaration above that we're using, you took out the name and you just slapped it in place where you're using the function, then that's what makes an anonymous function. They're good in some ways, that they don't clutter up your namespace, but they're bad in other ways because they're not reusable between different requests. Does that make sense? Sort of? Okay. So, let's make a new AJAX request. Let me just comment this one quickly. Request hello.txt and print to console. Let's make another one. We have this PHP script input.php. We can write an AJAX request which also targets this PHP script. Let's do that now. Request input.php, give it some parameters, and print to console. So, get, we are requesting input.php. We are providing some actual parameters this time, but we will use the same log callback function just to print it to console. Once we've done an example or two like this, then we can do something maybe a little more interesting. So, the way that we provide parameters is by providing them here as a sequence of key value pairs. So if you recall from this example, we are looking for two parameters, name and age. Name and age. There you go. You see the other thing I like about the commas, putting the commas at the beginning? See how like it's very clear to see what's nested and what's not? You know? Like it looks nice. It looks nice. I don't care what you think, Raphael. So, here we're passing name Felix age 3 into input.php. Let's execute it and see what happens. There we go. We get greetings from serverland, our text file, but we also get hello, Felix aged 3, how are you? So, the result of the PHP script is given to us not as an entire website, but only as a small chunk of data that gets flitted into a JavaScript function as an argument, which we can then do whatever we please with. For example, let's say we wanted to integrate this into some HTML component of the web page. Well, first we would need a component to integrate it into, wouldn't we? So let's go to our HTML page. Page 2, Ajax examples. Page 2. There we go. Div. ID is equal to output. There we go. Div. There we go. And let's write another callback function. Function div callback. Taking text. This time, rather than outputting our information to the JavaScript console, we are going to pull a reference to the div element about text txt. I think that's how jQuery works. There you go. That is how jQuery works. And there you go. There you have it. See, all I'm doing is I'm taking this input text, and I'm writing it into the div rather than writing it into the console. Pardon me. I'm actually not even using the input, the ID that I assigned. Of course, this does have the disadvantage that if I have multiple divs, it populates each one of them with that text. So you'll want to, like when you, for example, do your assignment 3s, you'll want to, crank that down so that you're dealing with an HTML element, not all HTML elements, right? Or all items of the type. Shall I do that for you, just so that you guys review that? Yeah? Okay, so let's say you wanted to do that one. Let me just, okay, I'll do a little style, so we can actually see the divs. Div gets order 2 pixels dotted gray. And also height is 50 pixels and width is 200 pixels. There we go, that should do. Now we can actually see them. Now we can actually see them. There you go. And now if I want to modify just one of those, I set ID equal to some ID value, in this case output, in my JavaScript, rather than targeting, there we go, rather than targeting div, which targets all divs, I narrow this down using a CSS selector. Now, if we recall, what symbol do we use to do IDs in CSS? Square. I think you mean the pound symbol slash hashtag symbol slash octothorpe character, right? The sharp symbol? That one? Yeah. Dot is for classes. That is for IDs. Output. There we go. And now, only one that has that ID has that change applied. Does that make sense? Any questions? All good? Okay. So I'd like to do an example, maybe slightly more complicated one, using JSON data. So let's imagine that we have let's make a new file. Let's make a PHP file. Within this PHP file, let's make an array that contains, let's make an associative array. So array is equal to apples for someone name a fruit. Pomegranate. How many? 20. Good. Love it. Another fruit? Watermelon. How many? One watermelon. One more fruit? Strawberry.
6 billion.
Trying to be like Dr. Evil.
We can try to break it. That's fine. That's probably enough strawberries. That's probably more strawberries than have ever existed on the planet or are ever going to exist on the planet. Even, this is like multiverse levels of numbers of strawberries. So, this is like, maybe like even more than the number of strawberry cells that have existed in the entire history of strawberries. So, we have data. We wish to send this data to the server. The naive approach, which doesn't work, echo the array. Oh, let's see here. I actually do have to save that. Let's call this fruit.php. There we go. So, echoing the array directly, not going to work. Let's write an AJAX request now to request fruit. Request fruit. Just for the sake of variety, I'm going to make this a post parameter, or a post request. Fruit.php. There we go. Fruit.php will not require any parameters. And for now, let's just let's use log callback to view what it is that we are outputting from this. Sounds good? You must admit this is a remarkably small amount of code to perform something as fancy as going out to a server and fetching information, right? So, ugh. Blech. This is what the server is sending back. Break, notice, array to string conversion in B, array. So arrays print as the word array, and they give a notice, which includes a lot of HTML junk. This is deeply suboptimal. You can imagine, like, can you imagine what the end user would do with that? They would think, oh, this website's completely broken, which is probably, it's not completely broken, but it's broken enough. So, this is what we do, cats and kittens. Anytime you are transporting data of this nature across the data packet divide, you must JSON encode it before you send it. In PHP, this is relatively easy. We have a function for it. JSON encode. You've probably seen me use this a couple of times already, probably to reveal the structure of the get superglobal. Am I right? Possibly? Well, at any rate, JSON encode. Once we have that information encoded, you can see as it's received here on the other end, we have something that resembles the data that we put into this, right? Now this is still a string, right? If I were to, if I want to deal with this data as an array and not a string representing an array, I need to decode this information on the client side, right? So JSON is it's a two-stage process, right? This is how it works. You have your client, you have your server, the server wishes to send something to the client. It JSON encodes it, JSON underscore encode, and if it's receiving JSON data from the client, it will need to JSON decode it before it receives it. We then have this wibbly wobbly network traffic stuff. On the client side, when we receive information that's been JSON encoded, we want to use one of the JSON functions. So the JSON object in JavaScript contains definitions for creating and pulling apart JSON strings. Oh, one thing I should add to this diagram is when we're on this side of this line, the data is a native data structure, which is, what I mean to say is, it's just an array or an object or an associative array within the, as a first class element of the language. While we are performing the internet transport, it is specifically a string. JSON encoded. JSON is strings. Then, once we're on the client again, we want to translate it back into a native data structure so that we can search it or use it, in a sort of normal fashion. Right? So, there are two very important functions that are used for this: JSON parse and JSON stringify. Parse is what you use to get a string and turn it into a native data structure. JSON dot parse. On the other end, if we are attempting to send data from the client to the server in JSON format, we want JSON dot stringify. At our level, sending client information to the server in the form of a JSON is not, it's not that necessary, because we like at the moment we have the get parameters and the post parameters structure to structure our data, but the stuff returning from the server has no similar structuring, right? It's not returning parameters, it's just returning a text dump, right? That's why it's necessary to run it, if you want to convert a native data structure and send it over the internet, you must JSON encode it first and parse it on the other end. So the thing that we're missing right now, is parsing this JSON information. So let's go into our function, there we go, and JSON dot parse text. Throw that in there. So we remember that these expressions get executed from the inner to the outer. We execute JSON.parse first, then the results of that are passed to console.log. Save. There we go. Oh, here. So, we have caused an error, but not with the thing that we were, working on. We broke a different segment of the code. Let's take a look at the part of the code that we didn't break. You'll notice this now has the little the drop-down arrow. This is now a parsed array object. You can index this the same way that you would index any other JSON object, right? This is now an object because it's been parsed. Does that make sense? So this error here highlights why it's really important that that you understand what the server is sending back to you. In our case, the server has sent. So basically, the server is sending two different types of data. The first one, the one that's no longer working, that's plain text data, right? It's not structured with braces, it's not JSON. The second one is JSON. We changed our callback function so that it parsed things, assumed things parse as JSON. If it doesn't parse as JSON, you get that error. So, basically, we need two callback functions now. One to handle JSON and one to handle plain text. We'll make log JSON callback and log callback in the regular sense, which will remove JSON.parse. There we go. Now, when we are calling for fruit, we will use the JSON callback. Then, When it's text, it interprets as text. When it's JSON, it interprets as JSON. Does that make sense? Any questions? Any philosophical questions? No? If nobody says anything, I assume one of two things. Either this is so easy that everybody gets it and I'm just wasting my breath, or this is so hard that people have no foothold on what I'm talking about to even be able to form an intelligent question. I don't know which situation we're in at any given time, although I may have my suspicions. So, yeah, this class did turn into programming eventually, so sorry about that. So, once you have your data in the form of a native data structure, you can operate with it the same way that you would any other data structure. So, for example, if I were to let's just say object is equal to json.parseText. Rather than logging this to console, let's say let me just make another output here. Boink, there we go. Output 2. Let me throw some HTML in there. Out is equal to unordered list This is an act of mercy, by the way, because if you were paying attention to your assignment requirements. Let's say 4, can I do that? Out, I'm just going to do a slightly slimy, hard-coded version. Apples get object add apples, or actually this is JavaScript, so I can actually say object.apple apples. Are they all plural? No. I'm going to make it not plural. One of these things is not like the other. Pomegranates. Object.pomegranate. Watermelon. Object.watermelon. And strawberry is object.strawberry. There we go. Watermelons, strawberries. There we go. And we'll put that in output 2. Thank you very much. So now, yes, good. So, it didn't work immediately. This is a fantastic thing, because now you get to watch me debug it. So, first thing to do, of course, is to open up your the console, and let's throw in a couple of log statements to make sure that the data is transferring correctly. This is always your very first and most important step in debugging. make sure that the functions actually are passing around the data that you think they are, okay? So console.log text. Let's see what it looks like. So we are getting our data. That's good. Let's make sure that it's parsing. Oh, I see, okay. I see what my issue is. So, but that's okay. Next, assuming everything is everything is being transferred correctly, the very next thing you should do is check the HTML source to see if everything looks okay there. Go to the Elements tab and take a look inside. So output 2 appears to have nothing in it. This is a problem. So the question we must then ask ourselves is there a problem with the out variable? Which there clearly is. So let's print that as well. Console.log out. See what it contains. Console, there we go. Oh, just an end tag. Just an end tag. Where's all my lovely data? Well, turns out I was not concatenating it with itself. It's okay to structure your code like this, but you have to remember, you set up your variable once at the top, everything else gets added to the old version of it. Now, there you go. Now this looks ugly as heck because I have fixed the height of this box. If you used Bootstrap to do this, this wouldn't be a problem. But it is in the right place. If I go into the HTML source and just get rid of the height constraint, it fills it correctly. I have an extra bullet. Why do I have an extra bullet? Where's my extra bullet coming from? I just have an extra bullet. How silly. There we go. So, JSON data acquired from the server, parsed on the client, turned into HTML, and output to the web page. The step going from this to like a tweet is like just, it's not that much more complicated to do a social media feed from here, actually. Just imagine like apples was content of tweet, pomegranate was likes, watermelons was retweets, and then you just like modify the way that it shows up in the HTML. And basically it's the same mechanism. Except you do like more than one at once. Make sense? Any questions? Okay. Good. So we did that, Yep. As stated, post is equivalent to get, but a post request, but it sends a post request rather than a get request. The query string that you would send using a post request would of course be encrypted, rather than the get request, which is unencrypted and public. PHP can return JSON data using the JSON encode method, which we have done an example of. And of course, your slide for extra resources. So, how are you all feeling about Ajax now? You've seen a few. You've seen some examples. Do you feel you understand the theory? Are there any questions? Well, I guess everybody's going to get 100% on the test then. Good. So, in the interests of sort of lightening our load next week so that we can dedicate some time to review for the test, I would like to press ahead now into next week's material. If anybody, does anybody have any objections? No? You object?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I do feel like the energy is not that much, so if we can do it next week, that would be better.
Okay.
Or maybe like the 1 hour we have for tomorrow.
Okay. Well, in that case, I will propose that we use the remaining portion of class to do some of the exercises, which are typically in the assignments tab. There we go. Practice number 6, Ajax. So, for the rest of class then, let's see if you guys can come up with an implementation of this. Create an HTML page with a form that accepts inputs for a total number of numbers and a max number. The form should also have a submit button. When the submit button is clicked, an Ajax request should occur for a file called lottery.php. The lottery.php script should return a JSON array with a total number of randomly generated numbers between 1 and the maximum number. When the response is received by the front end, these numbers should be displayed in an ordered list as the winning lottery numbers. So for example, if the user enters 6 for the total number of numbers and max number of 49, Lotto 649, anybody? The result might look like this. There you go. Get to it. First step is to make the HTML form, which hopefully you folks can, now that, at least 5 of you have done assignment 2, and that required forms, so you should be able to crack off the web forms in reasonably short order. Go to. And, man, I should just always bring a box of Kleenex with me. Alright. You guys get to work on that. I'm going to go blow my nose. I've been having it's been so dry lately, I've been having terrible shocks. So did you get the web form yet? You're not even working on it.
I wish that kind of thing.
That's intelligent, yes. Although honestly, this one is like not as complicated as I think the first time I do.
Shut us up.
She's surprisingly already like started rolling over both ways, like, so she's rolled over a couple times from her stomach to her back, which is like impressive, but you know, within the next like 2 months is pretty, she's a little early for it. But then we had her laying on her back the other day, and all of a sudden, she's rolled over onto her stomach except for one shoulder.
Oh
The
yeah.
one shoulder stopped her, but the whole rest of her body was over. Like, how? It's something about the third child.
Yeah.
It's the survival instinct, I think. Like, I gotta start moving, otherwise somebody's gonna jump on me.
Yeah, that's,
I think
yeah.
again.
Yeah, our second and third at an advanced timeline for a lot of those types of mobility skills.
I can't say that our second, because I have a stepson, so my son, I don't say he's really like, he's pretty average for everything, except for walking. He was a little bit behind for walking, but that's because he's very, very active, and he's kind of like a wild child. He's your typical middle child. And the process of learning to walk took too long for him. So he could walk, but he refused to, because when he was on his, like, he wouldn't even crawl, but on his knees, he could run. So he would run around the room on his knees because he didn't have the stability to do it on his feet.
Well, it's like, well, this is faster for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but with Theo right now, he's just turned 9 months, and he is like pulling himself up on furniture and like kind of getting ready for walking, but like he never really properly learned to crawl. All he does is like belly scooting.
Army crawling?
Yeah. And I think it's because like we have a lot of tile floor, and like
Slide right on it.
yeah, like he just like he's quite fast at like scooting along, but
Yeah.
like he never like he tried it, getting himself up a few times, but more than a few times, but he just like that's just more efficient.
For the longest time, my son would just crawl backwards, but he like would still use it to get to where he wanted to go. He just knew he had to go backwards. He's like, if I want to get to that plant, pull dirt out of it. I got a plan going that way. Point in the opposite direction and then go.
Kids are cool.
It's very cool. It's true.
Okay. Should I do the form? You guys want to see the form? Yeah. Okay. Let's make a new folder for all of this. Call it Lotto. There we go. Let's make file new, save as in Lotto, index.html, something I'm using. There we go. You can copy paste a lot of this stuff over, but I'm going to destroy the body. Winning Lotto numbers. We then want a div to put the results in. ID is result and div. And we want the form. So the form is a form. And form. Now in our specification, it says that we want it to target a file called lottery.php. The way that we make a form target a PHP file is, oh wait. No. Nope. We're going to hook up a button event. So we're not going to rely on form.action or form the action attribute of the form, because this reloads the page. We don't want the page reloaded. We want to use Ajax to populate more information in the page. So we are actually, in this case, I think I'm actually not even going to use a form. I'll use input elements inside of a div. This will disable the button and prevent it from triggering a page reload. So we want a few inputs. Input type is, well, let's just say type is text. For two of them, the name of this one will be Max, and the name of this one will be num, and I will invert the order of those. This will be number of numbers. This will be max number. There we go. Throw a break in there. Throw a break in there, and then we need the submit button.
Is there a reason you're using the type text instead of the type number?
It doesn't, basically, to kind of illustrate the point that it really doesn't matter what type of input element you use, because all validation must occur on the server anyways. So, you can set this to input type number, but that doesn't mean that a number actually gets sent to the server. It still needs to be checked. So I am doing things in a slightly unsafe way on the client, but the client, doesn't matter, basically. Let's throw a button on here. Button text will be generate numbers. And button. And I will hook that up to an onClick event. Let's say request. There we go. So, there we go. So your next step will be, if you want to follow the path of design from the client down to the server, your next phase will be to write the request function. Right, which will require you to write an Ajax request. Do you want this code on the screen, or do you want the Ajax examples from previous on the screen? Oh, I can just do them side by side. What am I talking about? Monitoring, no. No, not at all. View? Ah, there you go, that'll do. There we go. Decrease you, increase you. There, how's that?
Should we be using jQuery for this also?
Yes. Yeah, you'll need to go and get the jQuery library if you don't have it already. I'd like to finish this example within the amount of time we have left for class, so do you mind if I just kind of blast away at it? All right. So the next thing that we need to do is to create the request function. This will require both a jQuery JavaScript file and a file called ajax.js. Now we have ajax.js in the previous folder, but we need an ajax.js in this folder as well. So we will make that ajax.js. There we go. We will also copy our jQuery file into this folder. Now everything is in place. So we want to write the function request. Function request. This function will send a GET request to the PHP script. So get the file the resource we are requesting is lottery.php, I believe. We are let's not worry too much about what we're sending just yet. Let's set up a callback function. For now, let's just take what we are receiving, which will be JSON data, and then print it to console. Console.log, JSON.parse, text. Well, we should call it JSON actually. Well, that might be a little. No, that's fine. All right. Because it's not text, it's JSON. Throw that callback function in there. There we go. Now we have everything we need to set up the communication, at least, with the PHP script. I always recommend only go this far. Just set up communication, see if you can get a hello world to send, because everything builds from that. But if you don't have the initial communication right, then you're going to spend hours coding something and have difficult bugs to fix. I don't know why this isn't working. Well, it's because the communication layer itself isn't working. So let's set up a new file, save as lottery.php. There we go. Open PHP, close PHP. There we go. Now let's just have this do something simple like echo hello world. So far, so good. If we take a look at this /lotto, there we go. There we go. There we go. We have an error. So it doesn't like my callback. Callback might be a reserved word. Let's try a different one. It's lovely. I love it how it tells you, Or, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it might just be the fact that I've called this a functon callback instead of a function callback. The lack of syntax highlighting should have been my clue. There we go. Now, click generate numbers. Oh. Unexpected token hello world is not valid JSON. Now that is true. It is not valid JSON. However, we can see that even though we're getting an error here, we are getting hello world coming through. Hello world is coming through even though it's not JSON. So, what we need to do now is we need to send the data from the client to the server. So, in order to send the data from the client to the server, we need to basically fill out the missing parameters that we haven't done yet. So let's say max is one thing we're sending and num is another thing we're sending. Now, what is max? It is a value in there, right? So, we need a way of extracting the value from that element of the DOM. So, we'll do this in a jQuery way. Let's go into the HTML and assign these two inputs some IDs. It's even fine if we call them N and M. There we go. Now that they have identifiers, we can extract them by identifier. M for max, and N for number. Value is the field that contains the value entered by the user in a form element, so dot value gets us what we want. There we go. But of course, it's always good to double check. So, rather than echoing a simple hello world inside of our PHP, let's verify that our get parameters are being sent correctly. We can do this by echoing out the JSON encoding of the get superglobal. JSON encode encode. There we go. Get. Oh. Unexpected token semicolon. Pardon me? Where's the unexpected semicolon? Line 3? Here? Oh, no, up there. Actually on line 3. There we go. So now, if we generate numbers, we get blank. We have not sent anything. Number of numbers, 6. Max number, 49. Generate numbers? Not working. So, once again, we enter debug mode. Console.log. Make sure that these are actually doing what we say they are. They are not. So, at this point, this is not the way to get a value out of something, out of an input element in JSON or in jQuery. So, jQuery get value from input field. There you go. Dot val. Nah, of course, bloody jQuery. Val. There we go. Now, if we take a look at that, there we go. Bing-a-bang-a-boom. Everything starts working. So, the server reports back that it is receiving max for num3. And if we take a look, we should match up to make sure that number of numbers, that's correct. 4, that's correct. We haven't crossed our wires anywhere. So, now, we want to generate, and I'm going to skip the filtering because we've only got like 2 minutes left in class. We want to generate that many numbers. So, for I is equal to 0, I is less than get num I plus plus. We want to make output array. There we go. Array underscore push onto out it's random. PHP random integer. See here, rand, is that it? Min, max, okay, yep, rand is it. Rand from 1 to max, get, again, I should be filtering this, but in the interest of time, I'm not. There we go. Echo JSON encode out. There we go. Boom. Save. Return. 6 numbers. Max is 49. Generate. There are your lottery numbers. Generate, 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 generate. You can see they're different every time. Randomness. Hurrah. Now, I'm out of time, but the next thing to do would be to take this array, write it into the ordered list similarly to how we did in the previous example. And that would be the complete addition. Any questions? Okay. I'll zip this up and post it. Thank you very much for your time and attention today, folks. See you tomorrow.